I'll become a Muslim today, whatever you say. It's like, in some parts of the world, for example, sometimes a woman doesn't need her own passport. She's just, on the man's passport, and he crosses the border, they stamp the passport. That's the end of the story. But that's not necessarily how women were coming into Islam, on the passport of their relatives. We have numerous stories of women who really risked their livelihoods, and I would say really risked their lives to join the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And this is something that is indicated in Surah Al-Tahrim in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, when it talks about when the women come to the Holy Prophet, so they're seeking refuge with him. Keeping in mind again that, this was an era in which for anyone, either a man or a woman, leaving your kinsfolk and, going to the enemy, which essentially the Muslims were the enemy in many people's mind at that time, you were essentially losing everything. I mean, I'm sure many of you have been to Hajj or Saudi Arabia or similar places. It's a very harsh environment, the type of environment which Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, he said this is a place where nothing is growing, it's not cultivated. Okay, it was a little bit more cultivated then, but still, water's scarce, there are always wars going on. You needed the protection of your kinsmen to survive. You couldn't necessarily just say, okay, I'm moving to the city of Medina tomorrow, I'll just get an apartment and get a job at McDonald's, halal McDonald's, of course. I'm saying it was a big deal to abandon your kinsmen and your tribesmen. And yet you'd have these women doing this. So the Holy Quran, what does it say? Does it say, well, send them back, we don't want women? Oh, no. Of course, it doesn't say that. It says for the Prophet to question them, see, are they believing women? Do they present themselves as believers or not? And if they are believers, then have them swear an oath. So the women swear a basic oath of morality, basic Islamic morality, believing in Allah, not lying, not slandering, not fornicating, not killing their infants, which of course was a practice in that time period, unfortunately, and a couple other things. And then they are accepted into the community, and that's that. And so we do find a lot of women were following this path, independently coming to the Muslim community. This is something I think we also see in the handshake hadith. Do you ever hear the handshake hadith? I don't know if you do or not. But a lot of times we speak about certain hadith of women taking allegiance to the Holy Prophet and not shaking his hand, because we do believe that it's not permissible for people who are not mahram. That is to say, they don't have a certain specific blood relationship, or they're not married, they're not supposed to have physical contact. So they say, for example, the Prophet put his hand in a bowl of water, and they put their hands in a bowl of water, and so on and so forth. But leaving aside the handshake part, because that's usually when we discuss these hadith, when we're talking about fiqh of shaking hands, the point is there were enough women taking allegiance to the Prophet to actually have these hadith. And similarly, it was important to him to take allegiance from the women too. They weren't just sort of people on the sidelines, just like he also took allegiance from the men. And so I think when we are portraying people, coming to the movement in that time period, this is also something important to portray. So that's a couple things right there. The presence of Muslim women in the house of worship in the early Muslim community. Also women independently coming to the message. We could also spend a little bit of time. Now granted, if this is a movie and an artistic portrayal, you might need to be a little bit creative about how you portray it. But you could also spend a little bit of time talking about what sort of women were coming to the religion. Were they all the same? Sometimes we just kind of get this broad picture. Women, children, okay, grinding the flour, barley flour in that case, and kneading some dough, and okay, she has some kids. Woman, we've got it. And I'm not putting those things down, by the way. I really don't want to sound like it, because they are vital skills for humanity. They're important tasks. But I am saying there was more diversity among the women companions of the Holy Prophet. And of course, if you want to read about that diversity, there are plenty of sources. I'll just name a couple. How many of you have heard of a lady by the name of Khamsa? 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's pretty good, mashallah. Well, she was actually known for being a very famous poet in her time. It's been said she was the best poet of her time. I'm not here to give an opinion on that. In fact, it's also She was actually referred to in Maqtal al-Hussein. I noticed that the other day. It was a very... I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you. Oh, and it sounds so nice now. So anyway, I saw her actually referred to in Maqtal al-Hussein the other day, which I didn't expect to see her in there. But the idea is, this is this very accomplished poet who is joining the companions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. I also learned recently that some of her poetry has been translated into French. Now I can't comment on that because I don't speak French, but you could look into it yourselves. So the idea is this is just, someone a little bit out of the ordinary who's coming into the community. Or for example, there was another lady by the name of Shifa ibn Abdullah, I think, who was known not only for being a healer, someone who would cure people, but also she was literate. I'm sorry, that's bothering me.
Yeah,
she was literate.
I just wanted to take it away because it's just rustling at the back, if that's okay.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry, my mistake.
No, it's fine. Anyway, she was also known for being literate. I think we're having an intermission here. Okay, she was known for being literate at a time when, as you know, there were not too many people in the Arabian Peninsula who were literate. Literacy spread after Islam, primarily, due to the difficulty of reading and writing, cultural reasons, and other reasons as well. And there are reports of the Holy Prophet instructing her to teach members of his family, women members of his family, how to read and write. So I think, not only does this point to, again, some of the education of some of these women, but also the idea that, for example, I believe in the message. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe there was a scene where the prisoners at the Battle of Badr are told, teach these people to read and write, if so that you can have your freedom. That was their ransom to teach. But there's no portrayal of the encouragement of female literacy, and yet we know that when Islam came, it did encourage both male and female literacy at the time. Especially, it increased it a lot compared to how it had been in the past. So that's another thing to take into consideration. Now, one of the more exciting areas that we could also look at the portrayal of women is in that favorite part of our Islamic history, the early battles. Very exciting, especially when we're not there actually getting hit and attacked and bleeding and whatnot, and it's all glorious stories. Anyway, but back to the topic. In this movie, for example, one of the things I did notice was pretty much the absence of women from the battlefield, except for that bit about Hind and the liver and so forth. But in general, they showed neither negative nor positive participation of women in the battles. Because we know we have both. Negative, of course, being on the side of the enemies. And of course, we do not like this as Muslims. This is haram. But the enemies who were not Muslims, they'd sort of bring these cheerleaders, essentially, to sort of egg on the guy fighters, get them to show off for these women. That's bad. We don't believe in that sort of thing. But it was going on, so they left that out. But also there was positive participation from the Muslim women, both in what you'd call stereotypically sort of female roles and also stereotypically non-female roles in a battle. So for example, there's reports of various women bringing food to the soldiers, bringing water. Obviously that was very important in the middle of the desert, caring for the wounded and so forth. And then we have cases where the women just went out and fought, right? So I'm sure most of you have heard of Nusayba bint Ka'b. She was one of those who stood with the Holy Prophet ﷺ at the Battle of Uhud. Because we know at the Battle of Uhud, most of the companions, unfortunately, did not obey the Holy Prophet. They went chasing after the loot in the battle. So the Prophet was sort of left a bit defenseless, and the enemies came in to kill him. And he had just a small number of companions who were protecting him. So she was one of them. She took up a sword and